Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining in. We'll be starting in just a moment. We'll give everyone a few seconds to log into the webinar and we'll get started. While we're waiting, if you want to see on the right side of your screen, there is a chat window. So if you want to just try it out, say your name, where you're dialing in from, and we'll get started in just a moment. Got Bangladesh, Maryland, South Carolina, Alaska, Canada, all over the place already. Wow. Nice spread out audience. Lots of US, Philippines. Excellent. Love to see it. Sweden. I think that's a new one. I don't think I've had a Swedish audience member yet. All right, looks like most of you figured out where the chat function is. So let's get started. So once again, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today with SparkHire in 15.5 for a webinar about building a happy workforce in 2024. With this webinar, we are hoping to address and provide you some actionable takeaways to help you improve your hiring process this year. Today's webinar is scheduled for about an hour, but it'll more likely take between 30 and 45 minutes. And then we'll have some time at the end for live Q&A. So if you do have any questions throughout, please just leave those in the chat. We'll mark those and get back to those in the Q&A at the end. I just want to let you all know you will also be receiving a recording of this via email to watch later on if you have to jump out or if you want to share with your colleagues. So first, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Patrick O'Connell. I am Senior Product Marketing Specialist here at SparkHire, and I will be moderating today's discussion between our panelists. For those of you who are unfamiliar with SparkHire, we are a talent acquisition suite that's used by more than 6,000 organizations in over 100 countries. And our ATS, our one-way video interviews, and talent assessments help organizations streamline their hiring process while connecting more people quickly with top quality talent. And then we're joined by 15.5, and 15.5 equips HR teams with a complete single platform solution to improve manager effectiveness, drive high performance and engagement, and increase retention. They offer a full suite of products, including 360 performance reviews, in-depth engagement surveys, robust goal and OKR tracking, and weekly manager employee feedback tools like one-on-ones and pulse ratings. They have HR leaders at over 3,400 companies who rely on 15.5 software and services to make their talent a growth driver. So today we have collaborated with 15.5 in this webinar to help provide some educational and actionable content that will help you attract the best talent, engage with them throughout the entire hiring and onboarding process, and then continue that positive candidate experience into the career with your organizations. So I'd like to introduce today's panelists. From SparkHire, we have Shannon Mundorf. She's an HR generalist. And from 15.5, we have Jackie Lancaster, a recruiter over there. So thanks to each of you for joining us today for the discussion. What we're going to do today is I will be posing some questions for each of you to answer. The audience will be able to join in and share their thoughts and their questions as well. Like I said, we'll circle back to any questions they have at the end of the live Q&A. And everyone in the audience too, if you have any issues hearing at any point or seeing our video, you can always try to log back out and join the link again. There's no issue there, but do let us know if you have trouble hearing us. So let's jump right into the first question for our panelists. So for the discussion, let's start at the very beginning. Oftentimes, the first way a candidate engages with your company is with a job posting. They may need to go research on your website, your social media, and other channels, but really the job description needs to interest them before they decide to look further into those things. And now that it's 2024 and candidate expectations have really evolved rapidly in the 2020s, how do you go about building an effective job description that's going to attract those strong candidates? And I'd also like to ask you, where are you posting these jobs for the highest quality applicants? Jackie, if you like, let's start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I would say people want to know what they're applying for, so they're not wasting their time, and you obviously don't want that to waste the recruiter or the interviewer's time either. So the first step that we usually take at 15.5 is working with the hiring manager on the job description. So at 15.5, role clarity is extremely important. So we want people to know upfront what the job consists of and what they'll actually be assessed against when it comes time for their performance review. So on job descriptions, we like to include outcomes, competencies, required experience, and then I like to have this week in a life section on most all. We have a couple that don't have it on there, but I actually get really good feedback from that. And even though candidates understand, like every week may not look the same, especially in that startup or smaller scale up type company. It's just nice to get an idea of like how many meetings may you have or kind of what your priorities might look like during the week. So I've gotten really good feedback on that one. And this is just also a really good time to introduce candidates to your culture at your company and pay transparency if you have it. So I would definitely include the salary band and then anything about the culture benefits that you want on the job description as well. In terms of where to post, I like LinkedIn because it's one of the big ones, and a lot of other smaller job boards actually will pull information from LinkedIn, so you don't have to individually post on those. And it's also always a really good idea to have the hiring manager and then any people on their team share the posting with their network, whether that is on LinkedIn or other sites that maybe they're connected with in their field. Because oftentimes, I mean, referrals are great and a really great way to get it started.
Yeah, I love that part about putting in the week in the life section because it's really easy for job descriptions to feel like they're cookie cutter. Everything looks the same. How do you know what's actually going to be like? So that's a great way for candidates to get to know if everything else looks the same otherwise between jobs. Why is this one special? What's going to make it great for me? So thanks for sharing. Shannon, how about you?
Yeah, I also love that. I'm going to maybe steal that little tidbit from Jackie. But I think a word that I really like to use when it comes to effective and enticing job descriptions is intentionality. I think too often we look at job descriptions as this like check the box activity versus being a really effective tool that can help us get those right people in the right seats at the right time. So similarly to Jackie, I actually really like to start by doing that thorough job analysis with my hiring manager. So we look at what that position really is. If it's a backfill position, I am making sure that the job description we're using still accurately reflects the position we're trying to have right now. If it's a new position, I want to make sure that I'm setting this person up for success before we even begin any interviews. I'm also a big advocate of outlining the core competencies that will help a candidate succeed in the organization. So from the highest level to like the specific position specific competencies, we want to make sure that we're very clear on the type of person that we're looking to have fill. This helps me ensure that we're hiring within our values as well. So I know this person is going to be a good culture fit as well as that good skill fit. As far as posting, we use the big ones such as LinkedIn and Indeed. However, I also target regional job boards, specifically when we're hiring for international positions, or like niche job boards such as Built-in when I'm looking for a specific skill set with our tech roles. So those are kind of where I focus, but I do love also having everybody share it to their LinkedIn. That's a great way to get the word out.
Yeah, definitely networking with your existing network. But then those regional job boards, that's a great point because the large job boards, LinkedIn, Indeed, all the ones everyone knows of, it's very easy for those to get saturated. So having a very targeted approach is a great way to go about it. All right, moving on. Let's say you have attracted some great candidates with your strong job descriptions, you put them in the right place and everything. So the next step is going to be proceeding them in the interview process. And as I'm sure we all know, there's an ever-growing list of ways that we can assess candidates these days, whether it's phone screens, video interviews, assessments, take-home projects, the list goes on. So these can all be great ways for your organizations to learn more about a candidate, but we do need to be very careful about not overwhelming a candidate with too many requirements. As we know, things have changed and candidates are a little more selective and want things to move quickly at this point. So I'd like to hear from each of you. What interview steps do you recommend including? How many steps is too many? And how do you keep candidates engaged throughout the interview process? Shannon, what can you recommend to our audience today?
Yeah, I think it's really tricky to nail down a specific number of steps because it's all dependent on each specific position. So I like to have a little bit of flexibility within our hiring process. And I start again by discussing that with the hiring manager so that we're on the same page. We make sure that we're also really transparent with our candidates about this. So when a candidate applies and they move through, they get an email each time that says, you're here in our hiring process, and here's our next step, and here's what you can expect, here's our timeline. And it spells out exactly what they can expect. I think for this, we really try and keep that open flow of communications, and then it helps the candidate stay invested and engaged because they're not sitting there like, what's coming up? How do I know? Where am I at in this process? For the most part, our actual process entails a one-way, which I find super helpful for candidates that are on the cusp of that resume screen. I just bump them on through. Then we follow it up with a direct manager interview. From there, we tailor it to the specific job itself, which can range from a team interview to a work assignment, to kind of judge the capabilities of that candidate along with the work processes that we need.
I'd say leaning into that open communication is just crucial. Like, we've all been there. We've interviewed or we've applied for a job and we get left hanging for a couple of weeks. That's the worst. So keeping them engaged, letting them where you are, that's huge. Jackie, what else can you add?
Yeah, completely agree with Shannon and you. It's very frustrating to not know where you stand. And I often think candidates they want to know something. If it's a no, just tell me it's a no, right? Don't keep me waiting for a long time. In terms of the steps, it will definitely depend on the position for sure, but we usually try to stick to 4 or fewer rounds at 15.5. I know that's not always the case for all roles, but I like to have a recruiter screen. This is obviously after any one-way or application. So the recruiter screen, hiring manager interview, a team or panel interview, whatever that may look like in the 3rd round, and then a final interview, usually with the hiring manager's manager, or if there's another executive team member that may make sense in that case. Definitely, again, like y'all mentioned, just letting candidates know from the beginning how many steps there are. I always like to share that in the recruiter screen. At the end, I'll share process, timeline, next steps, when they can expect to hear back. And I'll even send candidates sometimes, I call it like a non-update update, where at the end of the week, if I don't have an answer for them and I know they're either waiting or I've told them I will try to have something by the end of the week, I'll sometimes just send this email out. It's kind of I'll say this is my non-update update, because it's an update telling you, I'm sorry, I still don't have an update. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. We're still working on it, or here's what the holdup is. And again, most of the time people are, thank you so much for the transparency. I appreciate you just letting me know something. So I think they just want to know where they stand, because the market is nuts right now. I think we've said that for like 2 years, but they're in a lot of processes. They're interviewing multiple places, and the more they know, so they can make an informed decision, I think the better there. So yeah, I just like to check in and keep that communication open.
Yeah, excellent points. I love the idea of having that no update for them. So you'll see on your screen, everyone in the audience, I am currently sharing a poll. We'd like to hear from you. How many stages do your candidates have to pass through in the interview process right now before you get to the offer? Trying to figure that out. And while everyone answers, I'm going to ask both Shannon and Jackie, all your steps, what's your ideal length of time? Like these days, what's a good length of time to expect to be able to pass someone through all those stages?
Ooh.
Ideally.
Yeah, I think ideally I try and keep it each stage under like 2 to 3 days in the grand scheme of things. I think the market is moving really fast right now. And if you delay, you're going to find yourself out of luck with your top candidates. And we're seeing a lot of candidates have really strong offers coming in. So it's trying to balance speed with getting all of your steps in.
Sure. Jackie, How about you? How long?
Yeah, there's usually some crossover there. We try not to have any let any stage take longer than a week, or do like one stage a week. So I usually can average, if we're looking at about 4 stages, I would like to have an offer out within a month. That kind of keeps me at that 30-day start to finish. So knowing there's some overlap there and some, we may move faster in some stages than others. I'm like Shannon, under a week for sure. If you can knock it out in a couple days, that's great. Especially those interviews, if they're only 30 minutes or less at the beginning, like definitely getting those in sooner.
Fair enough. All right, looking at the answers, thanks everyone for answering the poll questions. Look like most people are in the 2 to 3 stages range, some up to 4 to 5. Only a couple are 1 stage or more than 5 stages. So looks like everyone's about in that same area. All right, let's keep moving. So for many jobs, a candidate will work with a team, but a lot of traditional interview processes that we've experienced, they often only include meetings with HR, with the managers and leadership teams. So this might give a limited view into what working with the organization could be like. So to help candidates get a better feel for their potential team members and to introduce your team to the candidates themselves, what are some ways that you like to use to engage team members in the hiring process? So Jackie, I'll go back to you. What does that team engagement look like for you?
Yeah, for sure. So I really like to include other team members in the interview process. So like I mentioned, that team or panel round that usually comes third for us, I like to get people that will either be a dotted line team member to the candidate, or if it's a role that they'll have a lot of cross-functional work in the organization, then pull someone in from that cross-functional team that will work with them a lot. I think it's important to get them involved in that way. If for whatever reason you're not able to bring other people in from different teams, you could also like network on LinkedIn or use other ways like that people can reach out and have conversations with each other. But I like to include them when possible, because it really is a two-way decision. It's not just our team making a decision. The candidate has just as much power and control there, and they want to make the best decision for themselves as well. And they want to make sure that the people they're going to work the closest with, that they get along, they can see themselves working with, they kind of know how they think and operate. So I think it's important to include them when possible. And for us in that panel type stage, it also doesn't have to just be question answer. So it's a great time to have an activity if the position warrants it, or some type of presentation. One thing I do always encourage the hiring manager in that round, if they are going to go that route and it's not just question answer, is to if there's something from the past the candidate can bring and kind of pull off the shelf. I think that's better than having them create something brand new for you and your team. So I always like to you just mentioned this. People are interviewing at lots of different places. That's moving really quickly. So I don't want them to spend a lot of time and feel like they're doing work for free and then not getting selected. So that's a great time when, if they are going to be collaborating with some other team members that get to be on that panel, have them show, what's a project you've already tackled that you can just kind of, even if you have to redact some information, maybe you can bring some of that to the table and show us. So I think getting team members involved in that way is really helpful.
Yeah, this is an interesting take that's actually new to me. Having the idea of showing a project that you've recently worked on, that's a great way to have the team be able to show it off. And we have some good conversation going in the chat. We're seeing that in some places like California, for instance, maybe 2 weeks is the window where you have a length to engage with a candidate. But we've seen the same thing. Another comment about how if you are in a government, a lot of times the process is longer. So having the opportunity for more sharing might happen in a longer process, but you also risk losing the candidate. So fine line to walk. Shannon, what do you like to do to get the team involved in the hiring process?
I love having our team involved in the hiring process. And I think I lean into that open communication that I have with my candidates. I use the same thing for my team, right? I personally like to have some sort of kickoff meeting with my team that is doing the hiring step, that really outlines what we're looking for, right? What to expect during this. What is the process? What has this candidate been through before? Who are all the players involved? And kind of basically set some baseline expectations about what they can plan on and be ready for. From there, I personally also really like to let my team take it and run. something that, a lot of my employees will hear me say is like, you're an adult, right? You got this job for a reason. You are a good fit with this organization. Now let's take that and build it into what we're looking for our next candidate. So I like to give them some freedom over their section of the process. We typically do not have our hiring manager in on these panel interviews. So we typically will just let the panel decide what they're going to do. And I think that this provides a really great sense of ownership over that section and ultimately leads to a really well-rounded view of the candidate. Because as we all know, we can kind of get into blinders a little bit of how we run our processes. So bringing in, outside team members that don't normally hire, I think is a really good perspective to bring for our candidates, not only to get to know our company a little bit more, but for us to get to know them in a different sense as well.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is I was actually just a member of one of those hiring teams that got to meet the candidate. And so a funny thing that we've learned too is when a candidate's meeting with their hiring manager, there's often tendency to put on a very, I'm going to be professional and be what you want me to be. And then when they meet with the team, they let their guard down a little bit. They show themselves a bit more. So it gives the team a chance to really see all the dimensions to candidates and let the candidates feel like they can show themselves openly. And it's a great opportunity for them. So thanks for sharing that. All right, let's skip ahead to, let's say we went through the process. You have found a great candidate, you've extended an offer, and they have accepted at this point. So that's great. But there's often that 2 to 4 week period before they actually start, when they're giving their notice or they're taking some time off while they're transitioning between jobs. And honestly, this can be quite a bit of downtime for the candidate and the organization. But really, we do want to make sure they're getting off on the right foot with this new job. We want them to feel excited about this new chapter. They're starting with the organization. And so I'd like each of you to talk about what are some of the ways that we can build that excitement in between their time where they accepted the offer and their start date, whether it's 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Shannon, what sort of things do you like to do to get your new hires pumped up for the job before they actually start?
Yeah, I am a big believer in crafting journeys. So just like we do with customer journeys and, realms such as marketing and sales, I also like to design the overall interaction experiences that candidates and new hires can have with us. So I look at their general time period that we have from when the offer was accepted to when they start and kind of space everything out in there accordingly. So, usually for a 2 week notice period, I'm sending out a new hire packet right away to get them into our HR system that we can start getting some of the information. Then a few days later, we send some of the not so fun forms, as I like to call them, for the new hire to fill out. Things like the background checks, the I-9 verifications, all the tax info, things that take time to fill out, but we don't necessarily want those to bog down the excitement of the first day. We also will send a swag box to our new employees about a week before they start, so that they have some goodies that get them excited, right? So we've been kind of spacing everything out little by little. And I think it's really important then that we have their onboarding plan ready to go 2 to 3 days before their first day, and then we share it with them. So if they're starting on Monday, usually by Friday, I like to have everything ready to go and sent their way, even to their personal email, so that they know what to expect first thing Monday morning. I think that helps really ease that anxiety and nerves that come with the starting, while also being like, okay, I'm ready to go for my first day.
Yeah, and I'll add one thing that really stood out to me when I got my swag box when I started. It was maybe 2 to 3 sentences, is a handwritten note from the CEO. Made all the difference in the world, just feeling like you're cared for the first day. So the sweatshirts, the t-shirts, the hats, that's all great. But getting a message from the CEO made a world of difference for me. So thank you, Shannon. Jackie, what kind of stuff do you do at 15.5 and would you recommend for our audience to excite their candidates?
Yeah, I agree. I actually still have my note that came in my box and some of the stuff that was there too. So yeah, it does. That stuff is very meaningful for sure. I think it's really important to have a smooth transition between recruiting and whoever or whatever comes next. So whatever that journey may look like, in whatever person or department that's going to fall on. So for us, our people ops specialist sends a welcome email about a week before the new employee start date. It really depends on the timeline there and when the offer's been signed versus when they're going to start. But we have a welcome packet attached that we've created. Something we just did in Google Drive. So it's very easy to update anytime we have changes, and it shares a lot of kind of housekeeping things like before your first day, things you may want to think about, common acronyms, common Slack channels, what to expect from onboarding, what time to be there, how much is self-led, all that good stuff is kind of in that welcome packet. And then we also have a Slack channel for new hires called New Here. That we put just the new hires in. We usually start people about every couple weeks in small cohorts if we have people starting. So it's nice to kind of have that space where if you get there on day one, you've got a welcome message, you know what to expect, you know what's coming your way that day. I think Shannon kind of mentioned this, but go ahead and set their calendar invites and things like that up early. I think that's really nice too, to just have that done before you even get there on day one. So when you open your laptop, you feel like you're good to go. And kind of to backtrack a bit, as I'm ending the recruiting process and they've signed their offer, I also like to kind of touch base and let them know what's coming next, just so they have an idea of what to expect from there. I know sometimes it can be easy for me to think like, oh, signed offer, that's wonderful, moving along because we have other roles open. It's easy just to kind of let that slip my mind and go on with what else we need to fill. But I think it's really important there to close the loop and show them the excitement, especially if the recruiter has been the one to really walk them through that process. So continue that excitement. If you need to collect an address for shipping equipment or whatever that may look like, I like to also use that time to share little graphics that they can post on LinkedIn if they want to share, their exciting opportunities. We had marketing make some of those. So I kind of use that email as a good closure. Like, here's what to expect next in terms of background check, onboarding, email, communication. Here's some cute graphics if you want to post to share your excitement. And then that's kind of the transition where then our people ops specialist takes over.
Yeah, it's such a fun idea having that pre-made set of graphics to go out on LinkedIn, because it lets them be proud of their new journey they're starting and get to share with their network. So I love that. We also had a great comment in the chat saying that one of the onboarding questions they like to ask is, what's your favorite candy? So they can send out candy to the candidates as they're ready to go. So good starting point. So let's keep that progression going. Let's jump to day one. We've got past that intermediary period, and the new hire is beginning their tenure. So again, it really is crucial to make that first good impression, and that can include strong socializing opportunities with the team, having scheduling in line, and even having administrative tasks done well. So let's poll the audience again before we get to the panelists with this question. I am curious to find out, does your organization currently have a structured onboarding process in place? So you can look for that pop up on screen. Just take a second to answer that. Very rapidly, yes, we have standard onboarding process from a lot of people. Okay. You'll see one of the options there is onboarding varies by hiring managers. That might be by team, by department. They may have it different even within the same company. So just curious to see how everyone's functioning on that front. All right, let's get to our panelists again. Jackie, what are you doing to ensure that candidates have an effective and engaging onboarding process? And I'd especially like to hear if you have specific suggestions for remote positions where getting that engagement for the onboarding can be more challenging when you're separate.
Yeah, for sure. So 15.5 has always been remote first. So that's the only way we've ever known onboarding and hiring and just operations. So I mentioned our people ops specialist sends an email out. He does ask some questions of the candidates or soon to be new hires in that email, where he asks for a response from them, and then to also share some fun photos kind of related to their answers. So on their first day, he will post a slide that has some pictures and some fun information about them so the team can welcome them, get to know them. I love that because I often learn so much more, because they're answering questions that you would not ask in an interview, and you just get to know people on a different, little more personal level. We are actually revamping our process, and so I do the first welcome session, and we've done it this way just once. So next week is going to be our second time around. So I've already let new hires know we're revamping this. Very open to feedback here. But we do ask them for feedback during their first check-in. So we use 15.5 at 15.5. So at the end of their first week, one of their check-in questions is about their new hire onboarding. And so last year, I took all that data and kind of ran with it and tried to improve our process. So that's why I'm working on doing some revamping this year. But in that first welcome meeting, I like to go over some important like company mission and values and some things like that we've talked about in the process and they've likely seen on our website and hopefully bought into before they've joined. But I also like to knock out some just general housekeeping things. And I thought about this from my own perspective, like what would I want to get done on my first day, or what would kind of ease my anxiety a little bit on day one. And so some of it is very, I don't want to say it's messy, but it's not your typical, like I'm giving this very professional presentation and just expecting them to listen. I want to share like some common 15.5 practices, some of the acronyms that they may hear, because they'll join right after the meeting with me, our first company-wide meeting of the week. They'll join, and will they hear some acronyms or some things that they're maybe wondering, what does that mean? So I'll show them like our knowledge base and just some things like that to really help them on that first day and in the first week. Some calendar maintenance, like if they haven't added the company calendar to theirs, I'm like, go ahead and bring up your calendar. Let's do that. So I like to make that part of it a little bit more casual and kind of question answer, like, what do you need from me today? And how can I help you make this a really good, first impression and first experience? And again, in that Slack channel that we create for them, the new here, I like to go in that morning, send them a welcome, make sure they're all tagged so they get the notification, hopefully first thing when they open their laptop, and then kind of lay out the day. Like, here's what to expect from the day. And then I make sure anyone else in onboarding that week that's presenting, they're also part of that channel. So if they have any updates or they get questions in their session they need to answer later, they can always go back and post that there as well. I would caution and suggest just not to overwhelm them. That's a little hard for me because I love having more info than I need. So I often love sharing more info than someone else needs. But I do try to remind them to protect their time. It's easy to jump in and you want to learn everything immediately and hit the ground running. But they'll have time for all of that. Take the first couple days slow, really protect your time, and hopefully the managers encourage them to do that as well, so they can really learn, let things sink in, and have a good first experience.
Yeah, I see you're getting some support in the chat for yes for an acronym dictionary. That's great for day one. And you actually answered one of the questions we had in the chat earlier. Where are you getting the feedback from the candidates that they like their onboarding process? And so I think it's awesome you're doing that early feedback retrieval from them and giving them a chance to speak up, because it can be overwhelming and intimidating when you're new on the job. So giving them that outlet is excellent. Shannon, what kind of stuff do you do during onboarding that helps candidates feel engaged?
Yeah, so like Jackie, we are actually in the process of revamping our entire onboarding experience, as we've had 2 separate acquisitions over the past year. So, I'm kind of re-looking at everything with a fresh lens. But I'm kind of still emphasizing that journey, right? What is it like for someone new coming into our organization? So one of the things that I really do is I work with our hiring managers to identify, usually because our hiring manager is their direct manager. I try and really identify what they're going to need to know that first day, and then we plan it from there. So we have a basic onboarding plan that every single person goes through, where we have this packet, right? And it's your general who, what, where type of information that's going to outline all of the basics. What time are they going to start? When are they logging in? Where are they logging in? Do we use MS Teams? Do we use Google Workspace? What's their email? Who are they meeting with first? All of these things. And then from there, I like to make sure that the little things are already done. So the invites are already set on their calendar. Any apps such as Slack or Zoom, those invites are already sitting in their mailbox. So that we can go through when I'm sitting down with them that first day and saying, okay, let's load this onto the computer. Let's put this on. Let's do this. We're making sure that we're welcoming our new hires on Slack, and we also do it through our HR systems so that they're constantly seeing it. We send out a company-wide email so that everybody knows that somebody new has started. And with us being kind of global, I think it's really important that, you know, our teams in other countries are aware so that it's not just this random name that pops up and they're like, oh, who is this person? They can say, oh, I remember we got an email. This is a new person on whatever team, so that they can know to reach out and give that person also a little bit of grace as they're learning as we go. So I find that all of this kind of helps really smooth out their first day. And again, starts that process of setting our candidate up for success.
Sure. Yeah, and I heard you talk about how you collaborate with the hiring managers to make sure you know what the candidate or the new hire needs to know at that point. So let's dig a little bit further into specifically talking about hiring managers. So on their side, there's a lot of administrative activity that can occur with HR, but the hiring managers themselves, they have a lot more ongoing interaction with the new hires on day-to-day work. So your new hires are going to look to that manager for their long-term direction. And you each work within your respective HR departments at your organizations. But I'd like to hear what you think that the hiring managers can do to really set the stage for new hires. So how can we, from HR's perspective, help hiring managers communicate goals, expectations, and professional roadmaps for those new hires? Shannon, if you want to start this one.
Yeah, so if we circle back to that effective job description that we came up with earlier, I think we can align on those expectations right away. If we've done our homework with the job description, have it be really accurate, we're going to be able to say, these are the expectations that we have for this position right off the bat. From there, one of the first things that I like to encourage managers to do is simply get to know their new hires. We want to build that rapport between the manager and the new hire. So what are they interested in outside of work? What makes them tick? What's their overall career goals? And then I can set that new hire up with some easy goals for the first week or two. And I try and get them involved in a project as soon as we can, just so that they feel like they're not sitting there twiddling their fingers. I think we've all been in a job before where you're like, okay, what do I do now? This helps them get to know the team as well and begins to highlight why we hired this person in the first place. After that first project, I usually encourage a little mini review just so that everybody's on the same page and we know what worked, what didn't work, and we can give some initial feedback. And then after that, I usually aim for a 60 and 90-day review with our new hires just to make sure that everything is going well. And then we will wrap them into our performance management after that.
Sure. So it sounds like you like to have a structured first week to make sure things aren't underwhelming or overwhelming for the new candidate, but it helps at least get their feet under them, get acquainted with the team. So that's great. Jackie, how about you?
Yeah, these are some other resources that we're currently updating, but we do have some hiring manager resources for a successful onboarding that we send out. I like to send that out once the offer is signed. That's just kind of part of my checklist, signed offer, and then I have all these things I do. So that's one, because I know if it is a couple weeks away, I don't want to forget any time in that time frame. So I mentioned earlier that we use 15.5 at 15.5. So one part of 15.5 is our best self kickoff. And that's something that we ask the hiring manager to do with our new team member within their first 30 days, ideally within the first 2 weeks, but definitely within the first 30 days. And that's a new hire, or anytime if you change managers, have someone new on your team, even if they're a current team member. So the manager has a completed best self kickoff within 15.5 where they've answered questions like some of the stuff Shannon mentioned, like what do you like to do outside of work? You know, if you could have dinner with one person, who would that be? What does your ideal day look like? So there are some work-related and non-work-related questions there. How do you like to receive feedback? What about recognition? just some things like that in the best self kickoff. And so when the manager and the new team member meet, they're both going through that together, question by question. So it's not just the hiring manager learning about the new team member, but then the hiring manager is also answering those questions. So the new team member can also get to know them as well, which I think is really important. And again, even if it's not a brand new team member, but just a new person on that person's team that's transferring, I think that's still a great way to kind of kick that relationship off and really get to know each other. There's also some questions in there about growth and what that looks like. And that's often a question I get in the interview is, what is growth in this role? And I'll share with people, it really can depend because growth to different people look differently. Some people may want to growth in their salary. They may want to stay in the IC role. Some people may want to be a people leader or be a manager one day. So that's why I think that best self kickoff or something like that time is so important from the beginning, because you get to learn from people. What do you want? What does your career growth look like at 15.5? And what do you want that to be? Because, what I want may look very different than what Shannon wants, even if we both say we want growth. So I think it's important to have that in that first week or so. And I think Shannon mentioned this as well, just that job description, which for us internally is a role and performance agreement. That is another great time to really make sure there's role clarity and that the new hire understands the expectations, what they'll be assessed against when it comes time for performance reviews. And then again, I think Shannon mentioned getting them involved in some projects is really good. Then we also do a 30, 60, and 90-day review for new hires as well.
Yeah, I love that, opening up that communication channel right away. You get to know each other. It makes it feel less like a big power dynamic struggle between new hire and manager. So levels a little bit, makes it easier to communicate. But then also, like you said, not having to wait a year for the performance review to say, this is what I hope to be achieving that first year, like right from day one, you can get onto that path. So thanks for sharing that. Now, I have one more question for our panelists today before we open it up to Q&A, but I'd like to ask one more poll question. So I just shared that now. If you'd like to schedule a conversation with either or both of our presenting organizations today, just choose the option that works best for you, and we'll be sure to get in touch with you with a rep after today's webinar. So as you answer those, we'll just move along. So we got one last question for Jackie and Shannon, and this one is about looking at long-term success and happiness with your hires. So it's all well and good to make a great first impression, as we emphasized throughout this webinar, but we certainly want our employees to stay happy and productive throughout their tenure at our organizations. This is obviously good for business, and it's good for the team culture, for the individuals. So let's talk about some of those ways that we can measure success and communicate those assessments with your team. So measuring success is something that's best done collaboratively with your managers and HR teams. And I know it's easy to just wait for that annual review to come around, but when it's really early on for new hire, communicating and measuring that success can set the stage for their long-term expectations for themselves, their life at the organization. So Jackie, what are some of the ways that you feel that HR and managers can do to work together to effectively support that candidate feedback and success process early on?
Yeah. So I mentioned the check-in a little bit earlier, and again, just for us using 15.5, we've got that constant feedback loop, which I really appreciate from the beginning. So, having check-in questions that can be tailored to certain people, departments, teams, whatever that may look like. Like we have specific questions for the new hires at the beginning. My manager can ask just our team certain questions. So that's one way that we get some feedback. So we've got the regular check-ins, also regular one-on-ones with managers. Those are also notes that we keep in 15.5. I mentioned earlier the 30, 60, and 90-day review, which I think is really important. And just feedback in general is, we have a feature within 15.5 where you can request feedback from people. I should probably use that one a little bit more often and not just like ask a question in Slack. But I think any way that you can solicit that feedback is really important.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for reiterating that plan, just to make sure that feedback loop is happening early on. Shannon, how about you?
Yeah, I think if we're really clear on our initial goals with our new hires, exactly what it is that they're supposed to achieve, we're able to set them up, right? So we can give them little bite-sized goals and get the momentum going so that they have some quick wins underneath them and can continue on. I encourage managers to have like super frequent. I'm talking, 1 to 2 times a day potentially for that first week. To check in with our new hires so that if there are any questions, it's not where do I find this person? How can I get this? We can quickly answer those questions. Or if they're having, if we have gotten them started on a project or any sort of assignment, they can get that guidance and that feedback early on rather than going through their entire first project and not knowing how they're doing. So I think that is really helpful to have our managers like holding their hand that first week. I also personally like to check in after the first week and after the second week just to make sure that we're all on the same page and that there haven't been any issues so far, and ask their feedback on how their onboarding has been going. Again, knowing that I am also revamping the system, it's really easy for me to forget to ask feedback. So similar to Jackie, I probably should make sure that I do that. But I at least like to say, okay, at 1 week and at 2 weeks, I'm going to ask and see how everything's going, just so that I know I can adjust things on my end. But I think overall, we really try and lean into that transparency to help new hires understand how they're doing and feel like they're set up for success so that we are ultimately putting them on a path where they can be successful with us.
Yeah, I love that. That feels like an evolution of onboarding. If you look back historically, I mean, it very easily could have been you're new here, figure it out, go do it, come back to me with results. And it's the way we can look at it these days. It's not about we need to do this because otherwise it won't be okay, but rather, like you're suggesting, hand holding through the first week, it's empowering people. It's building more productive employees that are going to be successful. And that's what you want there. So thank you all for sharing. And I know we have lots of questions that came through in the chat. So at this point, we're going to slide into some of those. I'll try to give some context if I can remember them. So the first one we have, if we were talking about how long it takes and how many steps were in your hiring process. And so Stephanie asked, when you say a month, what level of positions are you referring to that's an appropriate length of time to expect for a hiring process? We're talking professional, leadership, entry level?
I could take it, or at least start it out. I think a month is probably what you're looking at, especially for those big leadership positions. The higher up in the organization you go, the longer these time to hires are going to be, because you're looking for a very specific person. But even, when we talk about government positions, just sometimes take a little bit longer. Even some of their frontline positions can take upwards of 2 to 4 weeks, because there are more steps that they have to go through and more clearance that they have to go through. So I think, looking at, if I were to give a broad answer to this, looking again, the higher you go in the organization, the longer your time to hire is going to be.
Yeah, I agree. I think a month is a good standard for us. That is also assuming the applicant number is high and there's a really great pipeline, and that's not counting any time for sourcing proactively if that needed to be done. So like Shannon mentioned, I think if it's a role where you're not getting as much traction or there needs to be more sourcing done, then more than a month may be more realistic, depending on what that sourcing strategy looks like. But I would say for a role where you're getting a lot of inbound candidates, then a month is our usual there.
Awesome. All right, next question. This was in regards to when we have hiring team panel interviews. How do we run them to ensure that no one's talking over one another so that it adds value without being overly prescribed? I'll just jump in real quick because I just did this past week a few times. The way we started off was we started by asking more cultural culture fit questions or culture add, like learning about the personality, asking easier questions just to explain about themselves and get to know them. But then after that, we had already planned a few questions. We just went round robin and we let the candidate know that we were going to do as such so that they knew what to expect, and then that they would have question or time to ask questions of us at the end too. So it felt very lighthearted, casual, gave them a chance to open up before getting to the harder hitting questions. And I'll open up to Jackie or Shannon if you have more to add.
Yeah, I agree there. And I think Shannon kind of mentioned having that team a part of the kickoff or the process from the beginning so they know kind of what to expect. And you're not just throwing an interview on their calendar and then they're showing up not knowing who else is going to be there and who goes first and who asks what question. So whether that is an actual meeting or I do a hiring channel for each, or a Slack channel for each open position. So if I haven't gotten to meet with all those team members for whatever reason, then I like to make sure the process is clear in that Slack channel. And the hiring manager at least has connected with the panelists to let them know kind of the expectation there. So just making sure there's some good communication. And then we'll usually lay out, because you don't want to just leave it up to them to ask whatever question they want. That could potentially be an HR nightmare. You don't know what people are going to ask. They're not used to being in that seat every day. So I think just letting them know, here are the list of questions, and then they can kind of start and go round robin, however they want, popcorn it over to the next person. So they know they're not, it looks like they have it together in the interview. They're not waiting on someone else to speak or not really knowing their place or the order there.
Yeah, and I know that we collaborated with our hiring manager as well to run questions by them and say, what are the things that you are hoping for us to learn about them? So that's another great resource. All right, we had another question. What sort of tools do you use to track timelines for both recruitment and onboarding?
So we have an ATS, so we use our ATS that tracks the time to hire and overall where everybody is at in the stage. So it makes it really easy to push one person to each part of the hiring process. I don't have a super great process for onboarding right now. That is something I am still working on, but yeah, if anybody has one, let me know.
Jack, anything to add there?
I don't think so. It's the same for us within our ATS and then our HRIS. Once we get people kind of in the system, then it kind of does its thing behind the scenes in terms of timeline for when it's going to send out certain emails and things that are needed before and right after their first day. But yeah, I'm with Shannon on we're still working out within our own on the onboarding and just kind of what is that sweet spot? What does the timeline look like? How manual should certain things be? And what can we streamline? So yeah, not much else to add there.
Sure. I know that a lot of the workflows you can have with hiring process, like we have templates within ours and we can automate tasks and we have notifications set up, and by timeline, like if something isn't done by a certain date, then we get a little nudge to go in that direction. So that helps us keep on track, and we can set that by template and choose which one you want in advance so you know what to expect. All right, we have a couple more questions actually about the panel interviews. So for Hannah, she says that aligning the interview panels with company DEI goals is huge. She'd love to hear more about how individuals are providing an inclusive hiring experience for candidates. So how can we do DEI inclusiveness within those panels and interviews in general?
Yeah, I would start, and Hannah, you can correct in chat if this is depending on which way you're going with this. I would start by making sure that if you have a panel, that you have a diverse panel that represents your organization. And even if it's not within that one panel, but just across the board, if you're looking at your whole hiring process, look at it through that DEIB lens of, is this a true representation of the organization from start to finish? You don't want them to meet with 5 people and all 5 people look the same, believe the same, or in the same department if that's not, if you have the opportunity to bring in diversity in that way. So I think making sure that the panel is truly representative of the organization is one way to show candidates what DEIB can look like. And then you took the question away, so I wasn't able to see the rest. Will you read the end? Because there was something else that I wanted to address.
I apologize. I have to scroll back up to see that. Bear with me one moment. I'll try and find this. Okay. Yes, it was. I'd love to hear more about how individuals are providing an inclusive hiring experience for candidates.
And I would also say making sure, like I mentioned with the questions, making sure that those questions are, even if the hiring manager and the team have come up with those, it may not hurt for someone in HR to put eyes on it to make sure that those questions are okay to be asked, and that they're appropriate and it makes sense. You want to, I know sometimes people they think of fun things, what's your favorite type of potato or whatever but you want to make sure that you're actually getting somewhere with it. And that, again, someone in HR may have a little bit more of a DEIB lens when looking at those questions. Yeah, that is mainly what I can think of. There's some good training out there. We do our own. We don't use anyone else for training. So we have some internal like interview training that we can send out. I don't typically send it to hiring managers that hire regularly because they hire so regularly, they don't always need it. But if someone at your organization has not hired before, then it's not a bad idea to make sure they've done some training on bias and unconscious bias and bias in the interview process. And to do that, again, that's something we created internally, but I'm sure there are a lot of online resources that are out there and other companies that do training to teams for that.
Yeah, kind of adding. Oh, sorry, Patrick, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say there's another question that's similar, so I was going to kick that out there before jumping to you, Shannon. Along the same lines, when you let an interview team design the interview, how do you ensure consistency and fairness to all candidates with questions aligned to skills? So if you want to build on that question as well.
Yeah, so what I was just going to build on too, like the idea of keeping this internal document and knowledge center about hiring and what is and is not okay in hiring and what we can and can't ask and what we can and cannot evaluate our candidates on is a really good thing for people outside of the HR realm to have in their back pocket. HR should be keeping an eye on all of this hiring. So, we like to go over the questions that they're asking. Similarly, I like to make sure that I am touching on, this is what unconscious bias is. This is how it can show up. So when we're evaluating, we have a tool in our ATS that lets all of our interviewers evaluate. So I go through and I read every single one of those, because if there's something that is flagged, I can flag it and say, we are not talking about this. This is not going into our decision. And I can go back and recraft how we're doing it to make sure that we're living within that DEIB lens. And I think that's something that continues to be built. But I think, when it comes, and that goes similar to, assessing skills and making sure it's consistent, we should be having the same general question set that is used for all candidates. We want to have some standardized questions, and you can let conversations flow naturally, but we want to make sure that we're asking all of the same questions to each candidate so that each candidate has the exact same opportunity as other candidates.
All right, we are just about at time. Jackie and Shannon, are you okay if you run a few minutes over so we can get some more questions answered?
Yeah.
All right, for everyone who's not able to stick around a little bit longer, this will be emailed out, the recording. I'm going to skip the next slide. If you're interested in having SHRM or HRCI credits, those are up there on screen, as well as the contact info if you'd like to get in touch with either the panelists today. So like I said, the recording will be sent out, but we're going to stick around for a few more minutes and answer a couple more questions. All right. I have a question. How do you manage confidentiality, sharing information with new hires before their start date?
So most of the information that I will share with new hires is not any company trade secrets or anything like that. It is trying to manage just what they need to know for day one, right? So I'll send them their email login the Friday before they start so that they can go in on a Monday and know that they can log in. And they're not scrambling that first day, but we'll get into like company information later on. But anything else that they're turning in, any sort of tax forms, anything that has their personal information goes through like our HRIS system or a third party that we've worked with that will secure all of their information so that we're not exposed to any liability there.
Yep, same here. That's anything that we send that is 15.5 related ahead of time is going to be things that you may have to dig, but people could probably find on the website or on LinkedIn. Like it's there's nothing that we're going to share up front that they couldn't know or couldn't find out on their own.
Fair enough. All right, another question. We were talking about doing reviews. When we have 30, 60, 90-day reviews, does HR do that or your managers?
We have the managers do those just like they would. It's almost more like a mini performance review. So we have the manager do that just as they would do the performance review.
I think that was just Jackie. Shannon, did you have an answer for that as well?
No, I was going to say we're the same. I think it's worth having HR kind of check in at one of those just to see how things are going, or have their own scheduled check-in. But all of our actual reviews are done by the immediate manager.
Sure. Okay, another question from Heather. I've sent out new hire packets and instructions in advance, but find that very few new hires show up prepared with the forms incomplete or they don't have the I-9 docs with them. How can I increase the chance of success with having those items completed for start of hire?
Automation, right? I think we use a company for I-9s so that they can do them remotely, and they have a secondary source that they have it set up with the E-Verify system so that they don't have to actually bring their documents with them. Or all of our documents go through, like I said, the HRIS, so they're getting fillable forms so they can sit on their phone and just do it real quick on your phone. I think that is helpful. I think you can sometimes struggle too. It's going to depend on the job. I think, when I worked with an organization that had a lot of first time hires, it was their first jobs. We worked with a lot of younger people. I think they just didn't know what to expect and they didn't know how to fill out the forms. So maybe having some sort of guidelines there as well, or help in case they need help to fill out the forms, would set that up for success.
All right. I do see in the chat that Heather mentioned automation has not improved her, I guess, completion rates for those forms. So I don't know if there's anything further beyond that, but I feel like instructions would at least be a step in the right direction. All right, another question. I'm going to generalize this one a little bit. The question is about culture questions during interviews, how it may be more difficult for veterans, whether or not they'll answer questions specifically as opposed to expressing their full abilities. So I'll broaden that a little bit to say, are culture questions, do they tend to have biases, or do they somehow discriminate against some groups that may take them or answer them differently? Like, how do you go about mitigating those risks?
Yeah, I think they definitely can. And I think that goes back to making sure that when you're assessing for job fit, that you're really looking at the competencies and what is required of the job. Can the person come in and do the job? And anything that's going to be culture related there, and you kind of made this comment earlier, it's a culture add, it's not a culture fit. You want people to be able to add to the culture and feel like they belong, not feel that they have to fit into a place. So I think that the majority of the questions should definitely not be your culture add type questions. And a lot of times you get the through that culture ad, you get through their responses to the questions about the job and the competencies. You don't even always have to ask additional questions, because through how they answer and just their response, you get a sense of the person and how they show up and their priorities and what they want to bring to the culture, what they want to get out of it at a company. So, but again, if you're going to have any culture questions specifically on there, that definitely does not need to be the majority. I think the focus needs to stay on competencies and just the basics of the job.
Yeah, I'll share too what I was saying about how we like to ask questions that let the candidate open up before getting into the skills related questions. One of the questions that we like to ask is there something on your desk that has a story attached to it or a passion that you can share with us? And it's not so much to find out, do we like the person, as much as it's okay, let your guard down. You can open up and we're going to respect you and give you the time to let yourself be seen. So it's less about saying, yes, are you a fit, versus we want to see you and hear from you and see all that you're capable of. All right, we have 2 more questions I marked. How do you ensure the job description has inclusive language?
I think going back to, kind of what we've been talking a little bit about is making sure that we're focusing on job duties, competencies, and, the baseline, what this person needs to be able to do. I like to have an overall summary of just our company and what it's been doing, just so that the person knows what they're walking into. But I do not use any person language. If there is a need to use a, nominator, he, she, they, I strictly stick to they, them, because I am not going to single out which way we're going to go. But I think it's really important just to focus on those core aspects of a job description so that we're not biasing one direction or another.
Yeah, there are also some websites out there that you can copy and paste your job description and upload, and it will pull, even on top of what Shannon said, some other language like rock star, go getter. Like, there are certain words that it will flag as like, hey, there's a lot of like masculine type words or energy in this job post, and things that you may not even catch if you're just reading the job description, or if it's one that you've looked at a million times. So there are some free options out there where you can just copy and paste, and it'll kind of give you a summary of suggestions to change.
I also just thought of something to add when we're looking at requirements for jobs. Determine if it's actually a requirement or if it's just a wish list. Things like college degree, right? A previous organization that I worked with, we had a tendency to say college degree or relevant experience. If you have similar experience, I don't necessarily need a college degree, because that's not going to make or break this position. So really look at your requirements and see if it's actually a requirement or if it's just on there because it always has been, right? Like, get rid of it just because it's there.
Another point that came up in a recent webinar we did about DEI hiring specifically was working with the legal team, if you have one, to look at your non-discrimination or anti-discrimination clauses that you include in the job posting itself, so that the candidates know that you're proactively looking at and care about those subject matters. So it just can help let the guard down a little bit there too.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. One more question we have today is, can you retract an offer you make to a candidate? And how do you do this in a polite way?
Yeah, I'll take this to start. I think it depends on, yes, you can. And my thought was, it depends on why. Like, the conversation you're going to have with them and how to do it politely is going to be around the why you're retracting. So if it's a role that is not just someone has said, hey, we actually don't have budget for this, we're not hiring for this role at all anymore, that's one conversation, versus if I don't know why else if you're just wanting to hire somebody different, that's going to obviously be a very different, sensitive conversation. I would say we've talked about this several times throughout the webinar, just being transparent and honest, I think is going to be the most important there. As soon as the team knows we have to retract this offer, we cannot hire for this position, reach out to the candidate. I would love for the hiring manager or whoever has worked most closely, especially if it's been towards the end of the process, have them reach out and have that conversation so they can actually share some feedback. I think sometimes when that comes just from a recruiter, it can feel a little removed and a little bit more formal. And if they have additional questions, then the recruiter may not know some of the ins and outs or the whys or some of the conversation that's been going on the team or in the department as to why that decision's been made. And if it's the opposite case at your organization, then obviously the other person would make sense to have that conversation. But I think whoever's the most knowledgeable there on the whys and can give the best feedback is best to have that open and honest and transparent conversation with that person. And then, of course, if it is a reason for budget or, it's not something that you can control and you would love to have them another time, always leave that door open. See how you can stay connected. Can you mentor them? Can you refer them to your, within your network because you made a great connection? Like, how can you continue to keep that relationship strong and stay connected to that person if you do have to retract?
We have a few follow-up questions that are actually very related to this. So Shannon, I'm sorry, you might be able to answer these in your response too. So some of the additional questions are, or one comment, good thing to point out, make sure you do this with your legal team involved, just to make sure you're not getting a discrimination type of lawsuit filed against you by the candidate, thinking they were improperly denied a job. But what if the reason is that their background check didn't clear? And then also, how do we ensure that we're not having biases when recruiting candidates if they've been justice impacted? So fair chance hiring types of opportunities. So within those frameworks, are you able to answer those as well?
Yes, I can. So in terms of, retracting an offer for a background check, that's actually what I was going to comment on is it's only done with your legal team at that point. You need to have it very tightly buttoned up. But we want to, in those cases, you want to have very specific steps laid out. You're going to have an adverse action letter that goes to the candidate before you fully pull that. And then there's a certain type of, or a certain length of time that they will have to respond to that. Because at least in the States, you can sometimes get false information on a background check. So there needs to be some sort of response time for the candidate if you're taking an adverse action. So there are some pre-adverse action steps that have to happen. So, work very closely with your legal team on that and work very closely within the employment laws of your country, wherever you're at, right? Because employment laws in countries vary from country to country. So really look at that before you take any adverse action for it. And I think to answer the question about justice impacted applicants, it's a similar vibe, but a little bit different, right? We don't need to necessarily work as closely with legal, but when we're looking at a background check and somebody who may have had something in their past that comes out, let's look at the job and say, is this a job that this person absolutely cannot do because of whatever is in their background? And there are certain jobs that are going to be like that, right? There are certain government jobs that you can't have a criminal record. But if you are really looking at the job and you're really getting to know this person, make sure that, we're not discriminating against this person just because they have anything on their background check. But let's really look at the job and say, does this need to be a position that has those requirements, or is it something that we can work in? And then from there, I think you look at, what it is, how serious of an infraction it was, when was it? But those are kind of, how I would go about kind of looking at that whole realm.
Anything else to add there, Jackie?
No, and I was actually typing in chat, and I stopped, but I totally my brain did not even go in the background check direction with the question initially. I think I tried to block that. I tried to block that scenario, but yeah, it is definitely one that happens. And just to double down on what Shannon said, just be sure that whether it is I saw someone else posted in chat with the third party to engage in adverse actions, and that's what we've done is with our background check company. Just make sure that that language is word for word what either they have shared or with your legal team has shared. It does not need to be altered in any way. So yeah, just make sure that you're definitely going that route if that's the case, if it is for background check reason.
All right, we have one last question just popped in. I know we're quite a bit over time, so we'll end on this one. Lauren wants to know, do introverts tend to do well on culture fit questions?
I love that question because I am such an introvert, and are you? And I actually interviewed an introvert this morning, and we connected on being introverts and some of the introvert things we like to do. And it's interesting how that comes out because I never ask people, are you introverted? They don't ask me that. It just kind of came out throughout that. So I appreciate, Lauren, that you are also an introvert. Maybe there are more of us in HR than I think. I don't know, Shannon, maybe that's like a separate support group or webinar we should have, like introverts in HR. I think they can and do. I think, and this is just going to be my own personal experience as an introvert, while I may not like, I call it grocery store talk, the hey, how are you? How's your mom? Good. And everybody goes about their business. I like deeper conversations. I like mission and values and really getting to know people at a deeper level. And I think there is certainly a way that can come out in those culture fit or culture add type questions in an interview. I think as long as you're keeping a check on that at every stage, and it's not just like a one interview chance that someone has, I think that their true qualifications and their culture add will shine and will certainly come out in other areas. So as a fellow introvert, I'm going to say I think we do great at those questions because we really want those close connections often, and we want people to get to know us at a deeper level. I think my best advice there to people in an interview setting is to just be yourself. Don't try to over practice for an interview. Don't be, Lauren mentioned performative. Probably the best interviews I've done from a candidate perspective, like when I was the candidate, was when I kind of showed up with this mentality of like, you know what, it is what it is. Either I'm going to get this job or not. Either they're going to like me or not. I'm interviewed out. My spreadsheet is full of jobs I've applied for, and people aren't getting back to me. I'm frustrated. I'm showing up as myself. You get what you get, kind of thing. And those are the ones I think I did the best on because I didn't stress. I didn't try to say what I thought they wanted me to say. I just showed up as myself, and I was like, if they like it, they like it, and it's going to work.
Yeah, for sure. There's apparently a lot of us introverts in HR. This is fascinating. We should look at this. But, first, Lauren, because you said it feels performative, and I just want to say, like, give yourself a break if you are interviewing, right? We all go through it. So, like, give yourself some grace there because it can feel performative. As somebody who was a performance artist in my previous life before I got into HR, it is, very hard to constantly be on. So I get that. But I think, something that we can also consider as HR people when we are training hiring managers and when we're having conversations too, let's almost role play because we've built up repertoire with our own internal people. So now let's teach them who are potentially extroverts, right? And can be very draining for all of us introverts. Let's teach them how to build up a repertoire with our introvert candidates so that everybody does have the same access to these positions and everybody, can come out feeling successful, that they put their best foot forward, whichever way they tend to lean.
That would be a study I'd love to see. Which departments attract which types of people, introverts and extroverts? As a lifelong extrovert, I feel like marketing is probably appropriate for me. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for all the great questions. You've been an excellent audience today. We're going to wrap things up at this point. Like it says on the screen, please reach out to us if you have any questions you want to follow up further. We'd love to have more conversations with you. I'll open the floor to Jackie. Shannon, any last thoughts you'd like to share with the audience today?
I don't. I appreciate the time and the extra time from everyone. Feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn, and maybe we'll start that introvert group soon.
Yeah, for sure. If there's any other follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to us. I think the HR community is a really great community overall, and we're all here to help and just make sure that everybody has the skills and the tools that they need. Sorry, I'm just reading Lauren's chat. But I think, we're all here to help each other, and the more resources and knowledge we have, the better off the world will be.
And on that note, we'll close things out. Thanks again, everyone. Hope to see you at the next webinar.